Sometimes the only family we have left walks on four legs. For Jack Colton, a weathered Montana rancher who lost his wife 3 years ago, his aging border collie Duke represents everything good still remaining in his quiet world. But when Jack discovers a mysterious lump growing on Duke's side, what starts as a simple veterinary concern becomes something far more extraordinary. The lump grows larger each day, defying explanation, until the moment it finally bursts open. What emerges challenges everything Jack thought he knew about the natural world. As he seeks help from unlikely sources, a reclusive former veterinarian and a native healer, Jack finds himself drawn into mysteries that run deeper than medicine or science. But what exactly came out of that lump? And why does it seem connected to the ancient land beneath his boots? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun painted the rolling hills of the Colton Ranch in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the weathered fence posts that had stood sentinel for nearly 4 decades. Jack Colton stepped onto his front porch, the familiar creak of the old boards beneath his boots, a sound as comforting as his morning coffee. At 58, his hands bore the calluses and scars of a lifetime spent working this land. Hands that had once held his newborn son, guided cattle through harsh winters, and 3 years ago held his wife Sarah's hand as she drew her last breath. Duke appeared from around the corner of the barn, his black and white coat catching the early light as he bounded toward the house with the enthusiasm of a dog half his age. The border collie had been Sarah's idea, a birthday gift for their son Michael when he turned 12. That boy was now 32, living in Seattle with his own family, calling every Sunday but visiting maybe twice a year. Duke, however, had never left. "Morning, old friend," Jack murmured, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's ears. Duke pressed his head into Jack's palm, tail wagging with the simple joy that only dogs seem to possess. Together, they walked toward the barn where the day's work waited. The ranch had shrunk over the years. What once sprawled across 800 acres now comprised a more manageable 300. Jack had sold parcels when times got tough, when medical bills mounted, when the loneliness after Sarah's death made the vastness feel more like emptiness than freedom. But he'd kept the heart of it, the original homestead his grandfather had built, the barn where 3 generations of Coltons had worked, the pastures where the cattle still grazed under the endless Montana sky. Inside the barn, dust motes danced, in the slanted morning light streaming through gaps in the weathered siding. The smell of hay and leather mixed with the earthier scents of animals and honest work. Jack's grandfather's saddle still hung on its wooden peg, the leather darkened with age and use. He'd bought it in 1952 with his first cattle sale, and the old man had been so proud he'd written the date on the back of the cantle in fading pencil. June 15th, 1952, the start of something good. Jack pulled on his work gloves and began checking the feed bins. Duke settled into his usual spot near the door, alert but relaxed, watching the world with the patience of a creature who understood his place in it. This routine had sustained them both through the hardest years. The quiet companionship, the shared purpose, the rhythm of seasons and responsibilities that kept a man grounded when everything else seemed to shift like sand. The cattle were already moving toward the near pasture, sensing breakfast was coming. Jack loaded the feed into the truck bed, Duke jumping up beside him with practiced ease. They drove the familiar path along the fence line, Jack's eyes automatically scanning for breaks, loose wire, anything that needed attention. This land had taught him to notice details, to read the subtle signs that meant the difference between a good year and a hard one. "Remember when Michael used to ride with us?" Jack said to Duke, who cocked his head as if he understood every word. Boy couldn't sit still for 5 minutes in school, but out here he could work all day without complaint. Jack smiled at the memory. His son had seemed destined to take over the ranch, had talked about it through high school, even started studying agricultural management in college. But then came the internship in Seattle, the job offer, the city girl he'd fallen for. Jack harbored no resentment. A man had to follow his own path, but sometimes he wondered what might have been different if Sarah had lived to see their grandchildren. They reached the feeding area, and Jack began distributing hay while Duke supervised. From the truck bed, the cattle gathered around with their usual mixture of eagerness and bovine dignity, steam rising from their nostrils in the cool morning air. These animals knew him, trusted him, depended on him. In return, they gave him purpose, a reason to get up each morning, something to tend besides his own grief. Mr. Colton. The voice came from behind him, unfamiliar but respectful. Jack turned to see a young man walking toward him, maybe 30 years old, wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt that marked him as someone from town rather than a working ranch. "That's me," Jack replied, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What can I do for you? I'm David Marsh from the County Extension Office. We received a call about some concerns regarding the old mining claims on your property." Jack's brow furrowed. "Mining claims? Son, there haven't been any active claims on this land since before I was born. My grandfather made sure of that when he bought the place." "Yes, sir, that's what our records show too, but we've had some inquiries from a geological survey company about mineral rights in this area. They seem to think there might be some valuable deposits that were never properly explored." David pulled out a folder from under his arm. "I'm here to verify the boundaries and make sure everything's properly documented." Duke jumped down from the truck and moved closer to Jack's side, his body language shifting from relaxed to alert. The dog had always been sensitive to tension, to changes in routine that might signal trouble. "What kind of deposits?" Jack asked, though something in his gut already told him he wasn't going to like the answer. "Rare earth elements primarily. The kind used in electronics, batteries, that sort of thing. Apparently, there's been increased interest in domestic sources since supply chains got disrupted overseas." Jack nodded slowly, his mind racing through the implications. He'd seen what mining operations did to ranching communities. The noise, the dust, the heavy equipment tearing up roads that were never meant for that kind of traffic. More importantly, he'd seen what promises of easy money did to families and friendships. "Well, Mr. Marsh, I appreciate you coming out to let me know, but I'm not interested in any mining operations. This is cattle country, and that's how it's going to stay." "Of course, sir. The choice is entirely yours. I just wanted to make sure you had all the information." David hesitated, then added, "Though I should mention, if there are significant deposits, the pressure to develop them is likely to increase. These survey companies can be quite persistent." After David left, Jack stood in the pasture for a long time watching his cattle graze. Duke remained at his side, occasionally pressing against his leg, as if sensing his owner's troubled thoughts. Change was coming, whether he wanted it or not. The question was how to meet it with the same quiet strength that had carried his family through 3 generations on this land. The sun climbed higher, and Jack knew there was work to be done. But first, he walked over to his grandfather's old fence post, the one with the surveyor's mark, still visible after all these years. He placed his hand on the weathered wood, feeling the connection to something larger than himself, something worth protecting. Duke barked once, a sharp note that drew Jack's attention back to the present. The dog was looking toward the barn, tail wagging but body tense. Someone else was coming up the drive, a pickup truck Jack didn't recognize. In the distance, he could see the familiar figure of his neighbor, Tom Whitehorse, walking across the field that bordered both their properties. "Looks like it's going to be a busy morning, Duke," Jack murmured. But as he watched Tom approach, he felt a familiar comfort. Some things in life could be counted on: the sunrise over the mountains, the loyalty of a good dog, and neighbors who looked out for each other when times got uncertain. 3 days after David Marsh's visit, Jack was mending fence in the south pasture when he first noticed Duke favoring his left side. The dog had been his usual eager self during their morning routine, but now, in the afternoon heat, he seemed to move with uncharacteristic caution. "Come here, boy," Jack called, setting down his wire cutters. Duke trotted over, tail wagging, but his gait slightly off. Jack knelt beside his companion and began running his hands along the dog's ribs, checking for thorns, cuts, or signs of strain. His fingers found something unexpected, a small, firm bump beneath the fur on Duke's left flank. The lump was about the size of a marble, warm to the touch and slightly mobile under the skin. Duke didn't flinch when Jack pressed gently around it, which was both reassuring and puzzling. In Jack's experience with ranch animals, anything that didn't cause pain was usually nothing to worry about. Probably just a fatty tumor, the kind older dogs developed as naturally as grey hair. "Just getting old like the rest of us, aren't you, Duke?" Jack murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. But something nagged at him as they walked back toward the house. The lump had felt different somehow. Not quite like the soft, squishy lipomas he'd felt on other aging dogs. This one had a firmer consistency, almost crystalline. That evening, Jack called his son Michael in Seattle. It was their usual Sunday. Call moved to Wednesday because of Michael's work schedule. "Hey, Dad, how are things on the ranch?" "Oh, you know, same as always." "Had a visit from the county extension office earlier this week. Seems some mining company is sniffing around, asking about mineral rights." "Mining? On our land?" Michael's voice carried a note of surprise and concern. "I thought Grandpa made. Sure all that was settled years ago?" "He did, but apparently these rare earth elements are becoming valuable enough that companies are taking another look at old claims." Jack settled into his recliner. Duke curled up at his feet. "Don't worry, son. I told them I'm not interested." They talked for a while about Michael's job, his wife Jennifer's pregnancy, their second child, and the house they were thinking about buying in a better school district. Jack listened with the patient attention of a man who treasured these connections to his son's world, even as it grew further from his own. "Dad, you sound tired. Are you taking care of yourself out there?" "I'm fine, Michael, though I think Duke might be slowing down a bit. Found a little lump on his side today. Probably nothing, but I might take him to see Dr. Hanson next week." "That's good, Dad. Duke's not young anymore." Michael paused. "You know, if something happened to Duke, you might think about getting another dog, or maybe even consider moving closer to town. That ranch is a lot for one person to manage." After they hung up, Jack sat in the gathering darkness, thinking about his son's words. Move closer to town. The suggestion carried an undertone of worry that Jack understood but didn't share. This land wasn't just where he lived, it was who he was. Sarah was buried in the family cemetery on the hill overlooking the house. His parents rested there too, and his grandparents. You didn't just walk away from that kind of history. Duke stirred at his feet, and Jack reached down to pet him. His fingers found the lump again, and this time he could have sworn it felt slightly larger, but lumps didn't grow that fast, especially not benign ones. He was probably just imagining things, the way men his age sometimes did when faced with reminders of mortality. The next morning brought the first real autumn chill, frost sparkling on the grass like scattered diamonds. Duke seemed more subdued than usual during their morning routine, staying closer to Jack's side and moving with careful precision. When they reached the barn, Jack made a point of examining the lump in better light. It had definitely grown. What had been marble-sized yesterday was now closer to a ping-pong ball, and the texture had changed too. Instead of feeling uniformly firm, there were areas of different density within it, as if something was forming inside. Duke tolerated the examination patiently, though Jack noticed the dog's breathing was slightly labored. "Let's get you to Doc Hanson," Jack decided aloud. He'd known the veterinarian for over 20 years, a no-nonsense man who'd grown up on a ranch himself and understood that working animals were more than just pets. Dr. Hanson's office was in town, a converted house on Main Street that still looked more residential than clinical. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and hay, with wooden chairs that creaked under the weight of worried pet owners. Jack had called ahead, and Hansen saw them right away. "Let's take a look at what we've got here," the veterinarian said, his weathered hands gentle but thorough as he examined Duke. After several minutes of palpation and observation, he straightened up, his expression thoughtful. "It's an unusual presentation, Jack. The growth rate is concerning. Tumors don't typically develop this quickly unless they're quite aggressive. But the location and texture don't match any malignancy I've seen before." "What are you thinking, Doc?" "Honestly, I'm not sure. I'd like to do some x-rays, maybe get a needle aspirate to look at the cells under a microscope." Hansen paused, studying Duke's calm demeanor. "The good news is that Duke doesn't seem to be in any discomfort. Whatever this is, it's not causing him pain." The x-rays revealed something even more puzzling. The lump showed up as a complex structure, with areas of different density, almost like layers of sedimentary rock. Within the center was something that looked almost crystalline, too regular and geometric to be biological tissue. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Hansen admitted, studying the films on his light board. "The internal structure is almost mineral-like. Could Duke have been exposed to any unusual chemicals or materials on your property?" Jack shook his head. "Nothing out of the ordinary. We use standard fertilizers and pesticides, same as everyone else." Though he thought about David Marsh's visit, the mention of rare earth deposits. "There was some talk about mineral deposits on my land, but that wouldn't cause something like this, would it?" "I wouldn't think so, but at this point, I'm not ruling anything out." Hansen turned back to Duke, who had remained remarkably patient throughout the examination. "I'm going to send some blood work to the lab, see if there are any systemic changes. In the meantime, keep a close eye on him. If the lump changes significantly or if Duke shows any signs of distress, bring him back immediately." Driving home, Jack found his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Duke sat beside him in the passenger seat, looking out the window with his usual interest in the passing landscape. Whatever was happening to his faithful companion defied easy explanation, and that uncertainty gnawed at Jack in a way he hadn't experienced since Sarah's illness. That night, he called Tom Whitehorse. His neighbor had lived on the adjacent ranch for nearly as long as Jack had lived on his own, and if anyone would know about unusual happenings in the area, it would be Tom. "I've heard the stories," Tom said after Jack described Duke's condition. "My grandmother used to tell about strange things that happened near the old mining claims, animals acting different, objects found in the ground that didn't belong there." "What kind of objects?" "Stones that weren't quite stones, things that seemed to grow rather than form naturally." Tom's voice carried the weight of old knowledge. The tribal elders had names for phenomena that white science couldn't explain. Maybe it's time you talk to someone who remembers those stories. After hanging up, Jack walked out onto his porch. The night sky stretched endlessly above, stars sharp and bright in the thin mountain air. Duke joined him, moving more slowly than usual but still eager for companionship. Jack placed his hand on the dog's head, feeling the warmth and life that had been his constant comfort for nearly 9 years. Whatever was happening to Duke, whatever strange forces might be at work on his land, Jack knew he would face them the same way 3 generations of Coltons had faced uncertainty before him, with patience, determination, and an abiding trust in the connection between man, animal, and the land that sustained them both. By the end of the week, Duke's condition had become impossible to ignore. The lump had grown to the size of a tennis ball, its surface taking on an unusual mottled appearance that seemed to shift color depending on the light. More troubling was Duke's behavior. He'd begun spending long periods staring at the ground in specific spots around the ranch, as if seeing something Jack couldn't perceive. Jack found himself checking on the dog constantly, running his hands over the growth with increasing concern. The texture continued to evolve, developing ridges and valleys that felt almost geological. Dr. Hansen had called with the blood work results. which showed elevated mineral levels that made no medical sense. "I've consulted with colleagues at the veterinary school," Hansen had said over the phone. "Nobody's seen anything remotely similar. The mineral concentrations in Duke's blood suggest he's been ingesting significant amounts of rare earth elements. But there's no obvious source." That conversation led Jack to examine his property with new eyes. He walked the fence lines with Duke, noting where the dog showed particular interest in the ground. There were 7 locations where Duke would stop, nose to the earth, sometimes whining softly as if hearing sounds Jack couldn't detect. Each spot was unremarkable to human senses, ordinary Montana soil and grass, but clearly meant something to the dog. On Thursday afternoon, Jack's contemplation was interrupted by the arrival of another visitor. This time, it was a woman in an expensive SUV, her business attire and confident bearing marking her as someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. "Mr. Colton, I'm Margaret Voss from Titan Earth Resources. I believe David Marsh from the county mentioned our interest in this area." Jack set down the post-hole digger he'd been using and studied his unexpected guest. "Ms. Voss, I thought I made it clear through the county that I'm not interested in any mining operations on my land. I understand your position, and I respect it, but I wonder if you fully appreciate the potential value of what lies beneath your property." She gestured toward the rolling hills. "Our preliminary surveys suggest mineral deposits worth potentially millions of dollars. Think about what that could mean for your family's future." Duke, who had been resting in the shade of Jack's truck, suddenly stood and began growling low in his throat. His hackles rose as he stared at Margaret Voss, displaying an aggression Jack had never seen from the normally gentle dog. "Duke, easy," Jack commanded, but the dog remained tense, every muscle coiled as if preparing for a threat. Margaret took a step back, her confident facade slipping slightly. "Is he dangerous?" "No, ma'am. Duke's never shown aggression toward anyone in his life." Jack moved between the dog and the woman, troubled by his companion's reaction. "I think we should continue this conversation another time. I've got work to finish before dark." "Of course. But, Mr. Colton, I hope you'll consider our proposal seriously. Companies like ours have ways of obtaining mineral rights even when landowners are initially reluctant. It would be much better for everyone if we could reach an amicable agreement." After she left, Jack knelt beside Duke, who was still trembling with barely contained energy. The dog's breathing was rapid, and the lump on his side seemed to pulse. With an inner rhythm Jack could feel through his fingertips. That evening, Tom Whitehorse arrived as promised, accompanied by an elderly woman Jack didn't recognize. She was perhaps 70, with silver-streaked black hair braided down her back and eyes that seemed to hold depths of knowledge accumulated over decades. "Jack, this is my aunt, Eleanor Crow Feather. She's a traditional healer, and she knows the old stories about this land better than anyone living." Eleanor approached Duke slowly, speaking in what Jack assumed was Blackfoot. The dog, who had been agitated since Margaret Voss's visit, immediately calmed. He allowed the elderly woman to examine the lump with her weathered hands, her touch gentle but thorough. "This is not sickness," she said finally, her English accented but clear. "This is awakening." "Awakening to what?" Jack asked. Eleanor straightened, her gaze moving from Duke to the surrounding landscape. "My grandmother told stories of the time before the white miners came, when the earth spirits still moved freely through this valley. The old ones spoke of guardians, beings that emerged when the land was threatened." "You're saying Duke is turning into some kind of guardian spirit?" Jack's tone was respectful but skeptical. Not Duke himself, but something within him, something called forth by the danger approaching this place. Eleanor gestured toward the hills. "The mining company woman who was here, she carries the scent of deep earth disturbance. Duke senses what she represents." Tom nodded gravely. "Aunt Eleanor has been having dreams about this area for weeks. Animals changing, the earth remembering old purposes." Jack looked down at Duke, who was now resting peacefully at Eleanor's feet. If this is some kind of natural phenomenon, why hasn't Dr. Hansen or his colleagues heard of it? Because Western science looks only at what it can measure and categorize, Eleanor replied. But the land remembers everything, every violation, every healing, every compact made and broken. What grows within your companion is the earth's way of protecting itself. Over the next hour, Eleanor shared stories passed down through generations of her people. Tales of animals that transformed during times of great need, of crystalline growths that appeared when sacred places were threatened, of the delicate balance between the visible and invisible worlds that most people had forgotten existed. "What do I need to do?" Jack asked finally. "Be patient, be watchful, and when the time comes, trust what Duke shows you." Eleanor placed a small leather pouch in Jack's hand. "Burn this sage when the growth opens. The smoke will help you see clearly." After Tom and Eleanor left, Jack sat on his porch with Duke beside him, the leather pouch warm in his palm. The rational part of his mind rejected what he'd heard. Ancient spirits, earth guardians, mystical transformations. But the part of him that had worked this land for decades, that had learned to read weather patterns and animal behavior with intuitive accuracy, recognized a truth that transcended scientific explanation. The night was unusually quiet, as if the normal sounds of crickets and nightbirds had been muted. Duke lifted his head occasionally, ears pricked toward sounds only he could hear. The lump on his side had taken on an almost luminescent quality in the moonlight, its surface patterns resembling mineral formations Jack had seen in geology books. Inside the house, Jack tried calling Michael but got voicemail. His son's world of board meetings and school districts seemed impossibly distant from the mystery unfolding on the ranch. How could he explain that his dog was undergoing some kind of supernatural transformation, that mining companies and tribal elders were warning of ancient forces stirring to life? Instead, he left a simple message. "Just checking in, son. Duke's a condition is developing in some unexpected ways. I'll keep you posted." As he prepared for bed, Jack found himself thinking about his grandfather's stories of the early days on the ranch. The old man had always maintained that the land chose its caretakers as much as they chose it. Perhaps what was happening to Duke was simply the latest chapter in a relationship between his family and this place that went deeper than ownership papers or fence lines could ever define. The phone call started 2 days after Margaret Voss's visit. First came a lawyer from Billings, speaking in careful legal language about mineral rights and eminent domain possibilities. Then a land appraiser who wanted to schedule a routine assessment of the property's value. Each caller was polite, but persistent, making it clear that Titan Earth Resources wasn't accustomed to taking no for an answer. Jack handled each conversation with the patience he'd learned from decades of dealing with cattle buyers and government inspectors, but the pressure was wearing on him. More troubling was Duke's deteriorating condition. The dog still ate and drank normally, but he'd stopped his usual patrol circuits around the ranch, instead spending most of his time lying in the exact spot where Eleanor Crow Feather had first examined him. Dr. Hansen made a house call on Saturday morning, something he rarely did except for emergencies. His examination of Duke revealed that the lump had developed what appeared to be faceted surfaces, like a crystal formation. The dog's temperature was elevated, but his vital signs remained surprisingly strong. "Jack, I have to be honest with you. This is beyond my expertise or equipment. I've been in touch with the Veterinary Research Hospital at Colorado State, and they're interested in seeing Duke if you're willing to make the trip." Jack looked down at his faithful companion, who seemed more alert when the veterinarian was present, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. What would they want to do to him? Extensive imaging, tissue samples, blood chemistry panels. They'd want to study how this growth is forming and why it's not affecting Duke's overall health. Hansen paused. "But I should warn you, once word gets out about this case, it's likely to attract significant attention. medical journals, research papers, possibly media interest. The thought of Duke becoming a laboratory curiosity made Jack's stomach tighten. What if we just let it run its course? Monitor him here and see what happens naturally? Hanson's weathered face showed his conflict between professional curiosity and genuine care for both dog and owner. That's certainly your choice. But if this growth continues to develop at its current rate, we could be looking at some serious complications, and if it ruptures on its own... He didn't finish the sentence, but Jack understood the implication. Without proper medical supervision, Duke could suffer unnecessarily, or even die from internal bleeding or infection. That afternoon, Jack found himself walking the ranch boundaries with a new purpose. He carried his grandfather's old surveying maps, comparing the hand-drawn property lines with the locations where Duke had shown unusual interest in the ground. The pattern that emerged was troubling. Each of the 7 spots Duke had identified lay along what appeared to be a geological formation that ran roughly northeast to southwest across the property. At the 5th location, near an old stock pond, his grandfather had dug in the 1960s. Jack noticed something that made him kneel for a closer look. The soil here had an unusual grey-green tint, and when he scraped away the surface grass, he found small crystals embedded in the earth. They were translucent and geometrically perfect, unlike any natural formation he'd seen before. Duke appeared beside him, moving more slowly than usual, but still eager to investigate. The moment the dog's nose touched one of the crystals, his whole body went rigid. The lump on his side began to pulse with visible rhythm, and Jack could swear he heard a low humming sound coming from within it. "Easy, boy," Jack murmured, gently pulling Duke away from the crystals. "Let's head back to the house." But as they walked home, Jack pocketed several of the strange formations. That evening, he placed them on his kitchen table and studied them. Under a magnifying glass, the crystals seemed to contain internal structures, patterns of light and shadow that reminded him of circuit boards or neural networks. The phone rang just as he was putting the crystals away. This time it was Michael, and his voice carried an urgency Jack hadn't heard before. "Dad, I got a strange call at work today. Someone claiming to be from a mining company, asking questions about our family property. They seemed to know an awful lot about our situation." "What kind of questions?" "Whether you had power of attorney for medical decisions, whether I was involved in property management decisions, that sort of thing." It felt like they were probing for leverage. Michael's voice tightened with concern. "Dad, these people aren't just interested in buying mineral rights. They're gathering intelligence like they're planning some kind of campaign." Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening temperature. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing useful, but Dad, maybe it's time to get a lawyer involved. If they're willing to track me down in Seattle, they're more serious than we thought." After hanging up, Jack sat in his kitchen, staring at the crystals on his table. The mining company's escalating pressure, Duke's inexplicable transformation, Eleanor's warnings about ancient guardians. It all seemed connected in ways his practical rancher's mind struggled to accept. Duke appeared in the doorway, moving with careful precision. The lump on his side had grown even larger, now roughly the size of a softball, and its crystalline facets caught the kitchen light in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. But what struck Jack most was the intelligence in the dog's eyes, a depth of awareness that seemed beyond normal canine consciousness. "You understand all this better than I do, don't you, boy?" Jack said softly. Duke approached the table and fixed his gaze on the crystals. The humming sound returned, louder now, and Jack realized it was coming from both the formations on the table and the growth on Duke's side. They were resonating with each other like tuning forks, finding the same frequency. Suddenly the crystals on the table began to glow with a soft blue-green light. Duke's lump pulsed in perfect synchronization, and for a moment Jack felt as if he was seeing the ranch from a completely different perspective. Not as a collection of pastures and buildings, but as a living system of energy and connection. that extended deep into the earth. The vision lasted only seconds, but it left Jack with an unshakable conviction. Whatever was happening to Duke was part of something much larger, something that predated human settlement of this valley by millennia. The mining company's interest wasn't coincidental. They had detected the same geological anomalies that were now manifesting in his dog. Outside, a wind began to rise, carrying sounds that seemed almost like voices calling from the hills. Duke lifted his head, listening to frequencies Jack couldn't hear, and for the first time since this all began, Jack saw something like anticipation in his companion's eyes. The growth on Duke's side was preparing for something, and deep in his bones, Jack knew that whatever was coming would change not just his understanding of his land, but his understanding of the relationship between the seen and unseen worlds that had always existed side by side on the Montana prairie. Jack woke before dawn to find Duke standing at the bedroom window, motionless as a statue. The dog's profile was silhouetted against the pale morning light, and the lump on his side had developed what appeared to be a network of veins or channels that glowed faintly beneath the skin. When Jack approached, he could hear that humming sound again, now constant and somehow purposeful. "What is it, boy? What do you see out there?" Duke turned to look at him, and Jack felt a jolt of recognition. The intelligence in those brown eyes was no longer entirely canine. There was something ancient there, something that had been awakened by whatever process was transforming his faithful companion. Outside, 3 black SUVs were parked along the fence line of his property. Men in business suits were walking the perimeter, some carrying surveying equipment, others taking photographs. They moved with the systematic efficiency of people conducting an operation rather than a casual inspection. Jack pulled on his clothes and boots, anger building in his chest. These people had no right to be on his land, and their presence at dawn suggested they'd been hoping to avoid confrontation. Duke followed him onto the porch, moving with that careful precision that had become his new normal. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Jack called out, his voice carrying across the morning air with the authority of a man defending his own ground. Margaret Voss emerged from one of the vehicles, no longer wearing the polished business attire of her previous visit. Today she was dressed for fieldwork, with sturdy boots and clothing that could handle rough terrain. "Mr. Colton, I apologize. For the early hour, we're conducting a preliminary geological assessment of the area. Our legal team has confirmed that we have the right to survey for mineral deposits under the 1872 mining law, provided we don't damage your property." "The hell you do." Jack stepped off his porch, Duke beside him. "This is private property, and you're trespassing." "I'm afraid the law is quite clear on this matter." Margaret held up a folder of documents. "These are properly filed claims for mineral exploration rights. You own the surface rights to this land, but subsurface mineral rights are a different matter entirely." Jack felt the ground shifting beneath him in more ways than one. His grandfather had always assured him that the mineral rights were included in the original purchase, but legal documents from the 1940s might not account for modern interpretations of mining law. Even if that's true, you still need permission to access the property for surveys. "Actually, we don't. The law provides for reasonable access to conduct geological assessments." Margaret's tone remained professional, but there was steel underneath it. "We're trying to be neighborly about this, Mr. Colton, but our company has invested significant resources based on satellite imaging and geological data that indicates substantial rare earth deposits beneath your ranch." Duke began to growl, a sound Jack had never heard from him before, deep, resonant, and almost mechanical. The lump on his side was pulsing more rapidly now, and Jack could see the network of channels beneath the skin beginning to glow more brightly. One of the surveying team pointed at Duke. "What's wrong with your dog? That growth doesn't look natural." "Duke's fine," Jack replied curtly, though even as he said it he wondered if that was true. The transformation was accelerating, and he could feel an energy emanating from his companion. that seemed to affect the very air around them. Margaret Voss stared at Duke with growing interest. "That's an unusual condition. Have you had it examined by a veterinarian?" "My dog's health is none of your concern." But Jack could see calculations happening behind Margaret's eyes. She was connecting Duke's transformation with the geological anomalies that had brought her company to his ranch, and her expression suggested she found the correlation significant. "Mr. Colton, I think we need to discuss this situation more thoroughly. Perhaps we could meet in town later today, somewhere neutral, where we can lay all our cards on the table." After the survey team left, Jack called Tom Whitehorse. His neighbor arrived within the hour, bringing Eleanor Crowfeather with him. The elderly healer took one look at Duke and shook her head gravely. "The awakening is happening faster than it should. Something is pushing the process, forcing it to accelerate. The mining company, their presence, their machines, their intentions, yes, all of that. The earth spirits respond to threat by preparing their defenses more quickly." Eleanor knelt beside Duke, speaking softly in Blackfoot. "He's in pain now, though he tries not to show it." Jack felt a stab of guilt. In his concern about property rights and mining claims, he'd been treating Duke's condition as part of the larger conflict rather than focusing on his companion's suffering. "Is there anything we can do to help him? The transformation must complete itself. Fighting it will only cause more pain." Eleanor stood, her weathered hands gentle on Duke's head. "But you can prepare for what comes next." "Which is what?" "The birth of a guardian. When the growth opens, what emerges will be both Duke and not Duke. Part of him will remain, but part will be something much older, something tasked with protecting this land." That afternoon, Jack drove into town to meet Margaret Voss at the diner on Main Street. She was already seated in a corner booth when he arrived, a spread of geological surveys and legal documents on the table between them. "Thank you for coming," she said, as he slid into the opposite seat. "I want to be straight with you about what we're dealing with here." She pushed a satellite image across the table. "This shows electromagnetic anomalies beneath your property that match signatures we've found at significant rare earth deposits in other locations. But what's unusual is the pattern. It's too regular, too structured to be entirely natural." Jack studied the image. The anomalies formed a network that corresponded almost exactly to the locations where Duke had shown interest in the ground. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that whatever is beneath your ranch may be unlike anything we've encountered before. Our initial surveys indicate formations that seem almost engineered rather than geological." Margaret leaned forward. "Mr. Colton, your dog's condition, it's connected to these formations, isn't it?" Jack met her gaze without answering, but his silence was confirmation enough. "I've seen your dog twice now, and each time that growth has become more pronounced, more geometrically complex. I think your pet is reacting to the same energies that are showing up on our instruments. What do you want from me?" "Partnership. Full access to study both the geological formations and your dog's condition. In return, you'd receive a percentage of any minerals extracted, plus funding for proper veterinary care and scientific study of what's happening to your companion." Jack pushed back from the table. "My dog isn't a research subject, and my land isn't a mining operation. Find somewhere else to dig." As he walked toward his truck, Margaret called after him, "Mr. Colton, with or without your cooperation, we're going to proceed with our assessment. The legal framework is already in place. It would be better for everyone if we could work together." Driving home, Jack reflected on his grandfather's stories about the early days on the ranch. The old man had often spoken about the responsibility of stewardship, about being a caretaker for something larger than oneself. Now that responsibility was being tested in ways his grandfather could never have imagined. Duke was waiting on the porch when Jack arrived home, the growth on his side, now visibly larger than it had been that morning. The dog's eyes held a mixture of pain and anticipation, as if he understood that his transformation was nearing a critical point. "Hang in there, old friend," Jack murmured, settling into his rocking chair beside his companion. "Whatever happens, Next we'll face it together. The next 3 days brought a strange sort of siege. Survey crews appeared each morning at the edges of Jack's property, never quite crossing onto his land, but making their presence felt with drilling equipment and electromagnetic sensors. Duke's condition continued to deteriorate, though deteriorate wasn't quite the right word. He was transforming in ways that defied medical explanation. The lump had grown to the size of a cantaloupe, its surface now clearly crystalline with faceted planes that reflected light in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Duke could no longer lie down comfortably, so Jack had arranged cushions on the porch where his companion could rest while still maintaining his vigil over the ranch. Dr. Hansen made daily visits, more out of fascination than medical necessity. The dog's vital signs remained stable despite the dramatic physical changes, and blood tests continued to show impossible mineral concentrations. Jack, I've been a veterinarian for 35 years, and I've never seen tissue behave like this, Hansen said on Wednesday evening, carefully examining the growth's surface. It's not tumor tissue, it's not infection, it's not any pathological process I can identify. If I didn't know better, I'd say Duke is growing a geode. Eleanor Crowfeather had taken to spending her afternoons on Jack's porch, sometimes speaking to Duke in Blackfoot, sometimes simply sitting in companionable silence. She'd brought sage and sweetgrass, burning small bundles that seemed to ease the dog's discomfort. The birthing time is close now, she told Jack on Thursday morning. Tonight, maybe tomorrow. The earth spirits are gathering their strength. What should I expect? Trust what you see even if your mind cannot accept it. And remember, what emerges will still love you, even if it also serves purposes beyond human understanding. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. A black sedan pulled into Jack's driveway, and a man in his 60s emerged. Tall, silver-haired, wearing the kind of expensive suit that suggested serious money and serious power. Mr. Colton, I'm Richard Blackwood, CEO of Titan Earth Resources. I believe you've been speaking with my people about mineral rights on your property. Jack didn't invite him onto the porch, but Blackwood approached anyway, his confident stride faltering when he caught sight of Duke. The growth on the dog's side was now clearly visible from a distance, its crystalline surfaces catching the afternoon sun. My God, Blackwood breathed. The reports were accurate. What reports? Our geological team has been documenting unusual phenomena in this area for weeks. Electromagnetic anomalies, mineral formations that don't match standard geological models. And now, he gestured toward Duke, Blackwood's entire demeanor had changed from corporate smoothness to barely contained excitement. Mr. Colton, do you understand what you have here? This isn't just about rare earth mining anymore. What's happening to your dog suggests the presence of formations that could revolutionize our understanding of crystalline structures and mineral formation processes. Duke isn't a scientific specimen. Of course not. But Mr. Colton, think about the implications. If we could understand how these formations develop, we could synthesize materials with properties that don't exist in nature. The technological applications would be limitless. Duke, who had been resting quietly throughout the conversation, suddenly lifted his head and began that deep, resonant growling. The growth on his side began to pulse with bright blue light, and Jack felt the air around them crackle with energy. Blackwood took several steps backward. Remarkable. The structure is responding to my presence, isn't it? It's some form of bioelectric defense mechanism. I think you should leave, Jack said quietly. Mr. Colton, I'm prepared to offer you $5 million for exclusive access to this property and full cooperation in studying your dog's condition. We'd ensure the finest veterinary care, the most advanced research facilities. Get off my land. Jack's voice carried the authority of 3 generations of Coltons who had defended this ground. And stay off. Blackwood retreated to his sedan but paused before getting in. You can't stop progress, Mr. Colton. If you won't cooperate voluntarily, We have other options: legal channels, eminent domain proceedings, public health concerns about an uncontrolled biological anomaly. The threat hung in the air as the CEO drove away, leaving Jack alone with Duke, and a growing sense that events were spiraling beyond his control. That evening, Eleanor and Tom arrived with supplies: more sage, bottled water from a sacred spring, and a blanket woven with traditional patterns that Eleanor said would provide spiritual protection during the birthing process. "It will happen tonight," Eleanor said with certainty, settling into her chair beside Duke. "The Earth spirits have chosen their moment." As darkness fell, the three humans maintained their vigil, while Duke rested as comfortably as possible on his cushioned bed. The growth on his side had taken on an internal luminescence that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, and occasionally Jack could see movement within the crystalline structure, shadows shifting like something alive was stirring. Inside, around midnight, Duke began to whimper softly. The growth was changing more rapidly now, its surface developing hairline cracks that glowed with blue-white light. Eleanor began chanting in Blackfoot, her voice low and rhythmic, while Tom kept watch on the perimeter of the property. "Easy." "Boy," Jack murmured, stroking Duke's head. "We're right here with you." The dog's breathing became more labored, and the network of veins beneath his skin began to glow more brightly. Jack could feel heat radiating from the growth, and the humming sound had become almost musical, a complex harmony of frequencies that seemed to resonate with the earth itself. At 2:17 a.m., Duke lifted his head and looked directly into Jack's eyes. In that gaze, Jack saw a mixture of pain, love, and something like gratitude. Then the dog stood, walked slowly to the edge of the porch, and lay down in the exact spot where Eleanor had first examined him weeks ago. The growth was now the size of a basketball, its surface a maze of geometric planes that reflected starlight in impossible patterns. Cracks appeared along its surface, spreading outward like a network of lightning, and from within came a sound unlike anything Jack had ever heard. Part harmonic resonance, part organic birth cry. Eleanor's chanting intensified, and she sprinkled sage around Duke's resting place. "It begins," she whispered. "The guardian awakens." As if responding to her words, the growth split open along its crystalline seams, releasing a wash of blue light that illuminated the entire ranch. What emerged would challenge everything Jack thought he knew about the natural world, and about the ancient compact between his family and the land they had called home for 3 generations. The light that emerged from Duke's ruptured growth was unlike anything in Jack's experience, not the harsh glare of artificial illumination, but something organic and alive, pulsing with the rhythm of a heartbeat. As his eyes adjusted, Jack saw that what had burst from his companion's side wasn't a tumor or infection, but something that defied every category his rational mind could supply. It was a sphere about the size of a softball, composed of what appeared to be living crystal. Its surface was translucent, revealing an inner structure of geometric patterns that shifted and evolved as Jack watched. But most remarkable was what lay at its center, a perfect miniature landscape, complete with tiny mountains, valleys, and what looked like flowing water. Duke lay beside this miraculous emergence, breathing heavily but clearly relieved. The dog's eyes held that same ancient intelligence Jack had noticed before, but now there was also profound peace, as if a long-carried burden had finally been released. Eleanor knelt beside the crystalline sphere, speaking softly in Blackfoot. Her weathered hands hovered over its surface without quite touching, and Jack could see tears streaming down her face. "What is it?" Jack whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might somehow damage the delicate wonder before them. "It's a seed," Eleanor said, her voice filled with awe. "A seed of the original world, the one that existed before the mining and the digging and the forgetting." Tom moved closer, his own face reflecting the same wonder Jack felt. Grandmother's stories spoke of this. When the earth is wounded deeply enough, it remembers how to heal itself by growing new beginnings. As they watched, the miniature landscape within the crystal began to change. The tiny mountains shifted, valleys deepened, and what Jack had taken for water revealed itself to be something more like liquid light, flowing in patterns that somehow seemed familiar. "Wait," Jack said, studying the formations more carefully. "Those mountains, that valley shape, it looks like your ranch," Eleanor confirmed, "but not as it is now, as it was meant to be, as it could be again." The implications hit Jack like a physical blow. This wasn't just some supernatural curiosity. It was a blueprint, a map of possibility encoded in living crystal. And if Eleanor was right, it represented the Earth's own plan for healing the damage that decades of industrial extraction had inflicted on this valley. Duke struggled to his feet and nuzzled Jack's hand, and for the first time in weeks, the dog seemed entirely himself again. The growth was gone, leaving only healthy skin where the crystalline formation had emerged. But the intelligence in Duke's eyes remained, as if the birthing process had awakened something in him that would never sleep again. "How long has this been growing inside him?" Jack asked. "Since before you found the first lump," Eleanor replied. "The Earth spirits recognized the threat approaching this land and began preparing their response. Duke was chosen as the vessel, because of his deep connection to you and to this place." "Chosen by what?" Eleanor gestured toward the hills surrounding them. "By the same forces that guided your grandfather to buy this particular piece of land, that kept your family here through drought and recession and loss. This ranch sits on what our people call a heart place, a point where the Earth's spiritual energy comes closest to the surface." Jack thought about his grandfather's stories, the old man's inexplicable certainty that this land was special, worth fighting for no matter what difficulties arose. He'd always attributed that conviction to simple stubbornness and pride, but perhaps it had been something deeper. "The mining company," Jack said, understanding beginning to dawn. "They're not just here for rare earth elements, are they? Their instruments detect the energy patterns that emanate from places like this," Tom explained. "They interpret them as mineral deposits because that's the only framework their science provides. But what they're really sensing is the Earth's own life force, concentrated in these heart places." Eleanor nodded gravely. "And if they succeed in extracting what they think they've found, they'll destroy not just the mineral formations, but the spiritual infrastructure that maintains the balance between the seen and unseen worlds." The crystalline sphere pulsed brighter for a moment, and Jack could swear he heard something like music emanating from within it, a complex harmony that seemed to incorporate the sounds of wind through grass, running water, and the deep, slow breathing of the Earth itself. "So what do we do with it?" Jack asked. "We plant it," Eleanor said simply, "but not yet. First, it must mature, must gather strength from contact with those who will protect and nurture what grows from it." Over the next hour, they moved the crystal into Jack's house, placing it on the kitchen table where the artificial formations Jack had found in his soil still lay. The moment the two types of crystal came into contact, both began to resonate with renewed energy. The formations from the ground seemed to reach toward the sphere like plants growing toward light, while the sphere itself pulsed with increasing complexity. "They're connected," Jack observed. "The stuff I found in the soil, it's all part of the same system, isn't it?" "The Earth has been preparing for a long time," Eleanor confirmed. "Growing the infrastructure needed to support what will emerge from the seed." As dawn approached, Duke settled onto his favorite spot on the porch, looking more content than he had in weeks. The ordeal of carrying and birthing the crystalline seed had aged him. His muzzle was grayer, his movements more deliberate, but there was also a dignity about him now, the bearing of a creature who had participated in something sacred. Jack joined his companion on the porch, both of them watching the sun rise over the hills. In the early morning light, Jack could see survey crews already setting up their equipment along his property lines, unaware that everything they thought they understood about this land had changed overnight. "They'll be back," Jack said quietly. "Blackwood and his people, they won't give up easily." Eleanor, who had been preparing to leave, paused in gathering her supplies. "Let them come. They can dig all they want in places where there is only rock and dirt. But here, in this hard place, they will find that the earth has its own plans." After Eleanor and Tom left, Jack sat alone with Duke and the crystal, trying to process everything that had happened. His practical rancher's mind still struggled with the supernatural elements of the situation, but his heart, the part of him that had always felt a deep connection to this land, recognized the truth of what he'd witnessed. The crystal sphere sat on his kitchen table, its internal landscape shifting and evolving as he watched. Occasionally, he could see tiny figures moving through the miniature valleys, not quite human, not quite animal, but clearly alive and purposeful. They seemed to be building something, constructing structures that grew from the landscape itself. Rather than being imposed upon it, Duke appeared in the doorway, moving with his old enthusiasm despite his obvious fatigue. The dog approached the table and lay down beside it, assuming what Jack recognized as a protective posture. Whatever this seed represented, Duke understood that his role as guardian was far from over. Outside, the survey crews continued their work, their instruments no doubt detecting the energy changes that had occurred during the night. But they were looking for minerals to extract, not miracles to nurture, and that fundamental difference would determine everything that happened next. Jack picked up the phone to call his son. Michael deserved to know what had happened, even if Jack wasn't. Sure, he could explain it in terms his city-dwelling son would understand. This was bigger than property rights or mining claims now. This was about the future of the land itself, and the ancient compact between the Colton family and the forces that had chosen them as guardians of something precious beyond measure. Michael arrived from Seattle on Friday evening, his rental car, pulling into the ranch driveway, just as Jack was finishing his evening chores. The father and son embraced with the complicated affection of men who loved each other, but had grown to inhabit different worlds. One rooted in the ancient rhythms of land and season, the other driven by the relentless pace of modern commerce. "Dad, you look tired," Michael said, studying Jack's weathered face with concern. "And older, somehow." "It's been a challenging few weeks," Jack admitted, leading his son toward the house. "How much did you understand from my phone calls?" "Honestly, almost nothing. Something about Duke being sick, mining companies threatening legal action, and some kind of—" Michael paused, searching for words. "Some kind of miraculous recovery that you can't explain medically." They reached the porch where Duke was resting, and Michael knelt to greet the dog he'd grown up with. "Hey there, old boy. Dad says you've been through quite an ordeal." Duke's tail wagged, but Jack noticed how the dog's attention remained partially focused on the house, where the crystal seed waited on the kitchen table. Even in his son's presence, Duke's role as guardian remained paramount. "The situation is more complicated than I could explain over the phone," Jack said carefully. "I need to show you something, but I want you to see it with an open mind." Inside, Michael stood transfixed as Jack revealed the crystalline sphere. The seed had continued to evolve over the past 2 days, its internal landscape growing more detailed and complex. Tiny structures that might have been buildings or might have been coral formations dotted the miniature valleys, and streams of liquid light connected them in patterns that suggested both organic growth and conscious design. "What the hell is it?" Michael whispered, leaning closer without quite daring to touch. "According to Eleanor Crow Feather, Tom Whitehorse's aunt, it's a seed of the original world. A blueprint for healing the land that grew inside Duke and was born when the mining threat became severe enough to trigger some kind of ancient response." Michael straightened, his business-trained mind struggling to process what his eyes were showing him. "Dad, that's impossible. Dogs don't grow crystals. Land doesn't have consciousness. There has to be a rational explanation." "I thought the same thing," Jack said gently. "But I've learned that rational and true aren't always the same thing." Before Michael could respond, headlights swept across the front windows. Both men looked out to see a convoy of vehicles approaching, not just the black SUVs of the survey. Crews, but larger trucks carrying industrial equipment. They're not waiting for legal approval, Jack realized grimly. Blackwood's moving forward regardless of my objections. Father and son watched as the convoy parked along the property line, and men began unloading drilling equipment by the glow of portable floodlights. The message was clear. Titan Earth Resources was establishing a permanent presence, legal niceties notwithstanding. Jack's phone rang. Margaret Voss's voice was crisp and professional when he answered. Mr. Colton, I'm calling to inform you that we've received emergency permits to begin mineral assessment drilling on your property. A federal judge in Billings ruled that the potential national security implications of rare earth deposits override individual property rights in this case. That's impossible. I never received notification of any court proceedings. The proceedings were expedited due to the strategic nature of the minerals involved. You'll receive the paperwork by courier tomorrow morning, but we're authorized to begin operations immediately. Jack felt the walls of his carefully ordered world closing in. What if I refuse to allow access? Then you'll be in contempt of a federal court order, subject to arrest and seizure of the property. Mr. Colton, we tried to do this cooperatively. Now we're operating under judicial mandate. After hanging up, Jack found his son staring at the crystal seed with new intensity. Dad, I may not understand what this thing is, but I know what it represents. If that mining company is moving this aggressively, they've detected something extraordinary on our land, something worth breaking the normal rules to obtain. Which means we need to document everything, get legal representation, and prepare for a fight that's going to attract national attention. Michael pulled out his phone. I'm calling my firm's litigation department. If the federal government is involved, this has implications beyond just our property. While Michael made his calls, Jack walked outside to where Duke remained on guard duty. The dog looked up at him with eyes that held both affection and ancient wisdom, and Jack felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a familiar coat. We're in for it now, boy, he murmured, scratching behind Duke's ears. Whatever that seed represents, they want it badly enough to steamroll every legal protection we thought we had. Tom Whitehorse arrived within the hour, followed by Eleanor and several other members of the tribal community whom Jack had never met. They moved with quiet purpose, carrying sage bundles, drums, and other items that suggested they were preparing for something more than a simple visit. The Earth Spirits spoke to us in dreams, Eleanor explained, as they gathered on Jack's porch. They showed us what would happen if the mining machines reached the heart place beneath your land. What did you see? Darkness spreading like poison through the underground waters. The connection between spiritual worlds severing. Places of power all across this region dying as the network that sustains them is broken. One of the other tribal members, a man perhaps 40 years old with intricate tattoos covering his arms, stepped forward. I'm Robert Crow Dog, Eleanor's nephew. I'm also a lawyer specializing in indigenous rights and environmental law. We may have legal options your son's firm hasn't considered. Michael emerged from the house, having finished his calls. My partners are sending a team from Denver tomorrow morning. They think we can challenge the emergency permits on procedural grounds. Buy time for a proper legal response. Time may be what we need most, Robert agreed. Traditional law recognizes protections for sacred sites that federal courts sometimes overlook initially, but are bound to acknowledge eventually. As the two lawyers compared strategies, Jack found himself drawn back to the crystal seed. Its internal landscape seemed more active tonight, the tiny figures moving with increased urgency, as if responding to the threat gathering outside. The structures within the miniature world were growing taller, more complex, and streams of light were connecting them in patterns that reminded Jack of neural networks or electronic circuits. Eleanor approached and stood beside him, studying the seed with professional interest. It's maturing faster because of the danger, she said. "The greater the threat, the more quickly the earth spirits prepare their response. What happens when it's fully mature? It must be planted in the exact center of the heart place, the point where the spiritual energy is strongest. From there, it will grow into a new kind of relationship between the human and more than human worlds. And if the mining company gets there first?" Eleanor's expression grew grave. "Then the seed will become dormant, waiting for another chance that might not come for generations. The earth is patient, but this may be the last opportunity for healing in our lifetime." Outside, the industrial noise increased as more equipment arrived. Floodlights now illuminated a staging area where drilling rigs were being assembled with remarkable efficiency. Jack could see men in hard hats and safety vests working through the night, driven by orders that clearly brooked no delay. Duke rose from his resting place and approached the window, his body tense with alertness. The dog began that deep, resonant growling Jack had learned to associate with supernatural threats, and the house itself seemed to vibrate in response. "They're not just preparing to drill," Eleanor said, her voice tight with concern. "Their machines are already affecting the energy patterns beneath the ground. If they continue at this pace, they could reach the heart place before we're ready. To plant the seed." Michael rejoined the group, his face grim. "My firm's preliminary research suggests the emergency permits were issued based on classified national security assessments. Challenging them is going to be extremely difficult, and it could take weeks or months." "We don't have weeks," Eleanor replied. "The seed will be ready to plant within days, and if we miss this opportunity—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood that they were facing a convergence of forces, legal, spiritual, and temporal, that would determine not just the fate of Jack's ranch, but potentially the future of the entire region's spiritual and ecological balance. Jack looked around at the assembled faces, his son representing the world of law and commerce, Eleanor and her people carrying the wisdom of traditional knowledge, Duke maintaining his vigil as a bridge between worlds. They were an unlikely alliance, but perhaps that was what the situation required, a bringing together of different ways of knowing in service of something larger than any individual interest. "What do we need to do?" Jack asked simply. Eleanor smiled, the expression transforming her weathered face. "We need to do what your grandfather would have done, and what his grandfather would have done before him. We need to protect the heart place, whatever the cost." Outside, the drilling equipment hummed through the night, racing against forces its operators couldn't perceive but would soon be forced to reckon with. The final confrontation was approaching, and Jack Colton found himself at the center of a conflict that would test everything he believed about the relationship between human ambition and the ancient wisdom of the land. Jack woke at dawn to the sound of diesel engines and hydraulic machinery. Through his bedroom window, he could see that the mining operation had expanded overnight. A dozen drill rigs now dotted the perimeter of his property, their lights creating an artificial dayscape. Against the natural twilight of early morning, Duke was already at the window, his body rigid with tension. The dog's growling had become constant now, a low harmonic that seemed to resonate through the house's wooden frame. On the kitchen table, the crystal seed pulsed with urgent light, its internal landscape showing signs of distress. Tiny streams, running red miniature mountains cracking along geometric fault lines. Eleanor emerged from the guest room where she'd spent the night, her weathered face drawn with exhaustion and concern. "The seed is ready," she announced without preamble. "The earth spirits are telling us we can't wait any longer." Michael stumbled into the kitchen, his city dweller's sleep disrupted by the industrial cacophony outside. "The lawyers aren't here yet," he said, checking his phone. "Denver flight was delayed. They won't arrive until this afternoon." "Legal solutions won't matter if we're too late," Eleanor replied, carefully lifting the crystal seed from the table. It felt warm in her hands, alive with purpose. "The heart place is approximately 2 miles north of here, at the highest point on your property. We need to reach it before the drilling machines disrupt the energy patterns that allow the planting. To succeed, Jack studied the activity visible through his windows. The mining crews had established a perimeter around his ranch that would make any movement toward the northern hills difficult to accomplish unseen. "They'll stop us," he said grimly. "Blackwood didn't establish this operation just to extract minerals. He suspects what we're dealing with, and he's not going to let us interfere." "Then we don't ask permission," Tom Whitehorse said from the doorway. He'd arrived before dawn with Robert Crow Dog and 3 other tribal members, all carrying hiking packs and expressions of quiet determination. "There are old paths through these hills that predate survey maps, ways of moving that white maps don't show." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "The ancestors walked this land for thousands of years without roads or machines. The paths they used are still there for those who know how to find them." Duke moved to Eleanor's side, his attention fixed on the crystal seed she carried. She knelt to bring it to his level. The dog touched his nose gently to its surface. The seed flared with brilliant light, and for a moment the entire kitchen seemed to hum with harmonious energy. "He remembers," Eleanor said softly. "The connection between them isn't broken, it's transformed." Outside, a new sound joined the mechanical symphony. Helicopters approaching from the south. Through the front window, Jack could see 2 aircraft, bearing the Titan Earth Resources logo, circling the ranch like mechanical vultures. Michael pointed at one of the helicopters. "That's not survey equipment. Those are security contractors. Dad, they're treating this like a military operation." As if summoned by their conversation, a convoy of black vehicles approached the house. Margaret Voss emerged from the lead SUV. But this time she was accompanied by men in tactical gear carrying serious weaponry. The message was unmistakable. Cooperation was no longer optional. "Mr. Colton," Voss called through a bullhorn, "by order of federal court, you are required to vacate these premises for your own safety while mineral extraction operations proceed. You have 30 minutes to gather essential belongings." Eleanor stood, the crystal seed cradled protectively in her arms. "The time for talking is finished," she said quietly. "Now we act according to the old agreements, the original treaties. Between your family and the land itself." Jack felt something shift inside him, a clarity that cut through weeks of confusion and uncertainty. His grandfather's stories weren't just family folklore. They were operational instructions for moments like this. The Coltons had been chosen as guardians long before they understood what that responsibility entailed. "Tom, how long will it take to reach the Heart Place using your paths?" 2 hours, maybe 3 if we move carefully to avoid detection. "And if we move fast, consequences be damned? 45 minutes, but we'll be exposed for the final approach." Jack looked at the faces around him, his son torn between legal caution and family loyalty, Eleanor holding the future of the land in her hands, Duke maintaining his vigil despite his advancing age. They were an unlikely army, but they were his army. "We do this now," Jack decided, "before they can establish complete control of the area." Eleanor smiled, the expression fierce with approval. "The Earth spirits have been waiting for this moment for generations. They've prepared the way." As they gathered essential supplies, Jack caught sight of his grandfather's saddle hanging in its place of honor. On impulse, he took down the worn leather piece and pulled out the surveyor's map the old man had kept in the saddlebag, a hand-drawn document that showed not just property boundaries, but also the locations of sacred sites, water sources, and what his grandfather had cryptically labeled places of power. The Heart Place Eleanor described was marked on his grandfather's map with a symbol Jack had never understood, a circle containing a tree whose roots extended in 7 directions. Now finally, he knew what the old man had been trying to preserve for future generations. Duke moved to the door, his body language clearly indicating readiness for whatever lay ahead. The dog had carried the seed within himself for weeks, and now he would guide them to the place where that sacrifice would find its purpose. Outside, the helicopters continued their surveillance while drilling operations intensified. Time was running out, but Jack Colton, grandson of Guardians, keeper of ancient trusts, was finally ready to fulfill the destiny that had been shaping his family for 3 generations. They left the house through the root cellar, emerging from the storm doors into a world transformed by industrial invasion. The ancient paths Tom led them along seemed to pulse with their own energy, as if the land itself was guiding their steps away from the mechanical intruders. Duke moved with surprising agility for his age, his protective instincts overriding physical limitations. Eleanor carried the crystal seed wrapped in traditional blankets, its glow visible even through the heavy fabric. Michael stayed close to his father, his business suit replaced by hiking clothes that made him look younger, more like the boy who had once worked these hills. They moved in single file along a ridge that provided cover from the helicopters while offering views of the mining operation below. Jack was amazed by the scale of the industrial deployment. In less than 24 hours, Titan Earth Resources had established what looked like a permanent extraction facility. "They're not just exploring," Robert Crowdog observed quietly. "They're preparing for large-scale operations. This level of investment suggests they know exactly what they're looking for." Halfway to their destination, Eleanor stopped abruptly. The crystal seed had begun to vibrate in her arms, its internal light growing brighter. "Something's wrong," she said, unwrapping the seed to examine it more closely. "The spiritual disruption from the drilling is affecting it. The miniature landscape within the crystal was changing before their eyes. Tiny fissures spread across the perfect valleys, and streams of light flickered like failing electrical connections." "How long do we have?" Jack asked. "Minutes, not hours," Eleanor replied grimly. "If the energy patterns collapse completely, the seed will become inert. The planting window will close, perhaps for decades." Tom gestured toward the final approach to the heart place. "We're exposed from here on. The path runs along the ridgeline. Anyone watching will see us." As if summoned by his words, the sound of helicopters grew louder. One of the aircraft had broken off from its patrol pattern and was heading directly toward their position. "They've spotted us," Michael said, pointing at the approaching helicopter. Jack made the decision that 3 generations of his family had prepared him to make. "We run. No more hiding. No more careful approaches. We get to that heart place, whatever it takes." They broke from cover and began sprinting along the exposed ridge path. Behind them, the helicopter's loudspeaker crackled to life. "Federal agents, stop immediately and surrender the object you're carrying." Eleanor ran with the determination of a woman a third her age. The crystal seed clutched to her chest like a newborn child. Duke bounded ahead, his ancient joints forgotten in the urgency of the moment, leading them toward a destination he seemed to sense through means beyond ordinary canine perception. The heart place revealed itself gradually. First, as a circular clearing where no trees grew, then as a depression in the earth that formed a perfect natural amphitheater. At its center stood a single ancient pine tree, its trunk scarred by lightning but still alive, still reaching toward the sky with defiant grace. "There," Eleanor gasped, pointing toward the base of the tree where the earth showed a circular depression. Exactly the size of the crystal seed. "The earth has prepared itself." The helicopter circled overhead, its downdraft whipping dust and debris across the sacred space. Through the aircraft's open door, Jack could see Margaret Voss speaking urgently into a radio. Duke reached the tree first, immediately beginning to dig at the prepared depression with his front paws. The earth came away easily, as if the soil had been loosened by forces beyond physical explanation. Eleanor knelt beside the hole Duke had opened and gently placed the crystal seed within it. The moment it touched the earth, the entire clearing erupted with light. The seed's internal landscape suddenly expanded, its miniature geography becoming somehow more real than the physical world around them. The ancient pine tree began to glow from within, its bark becoming translucent to reveal a network of energy. channels that connected it to underground formations extending in all directions. Through the earth, Jack could feel the pulse of a vast network awakening, connections spanning continents, linking sacred sites and places of power in a web of consciousness older than human civilization. The helicopter pilot fought to maintain control as electromagnetic interference from the awakening heart place disrupted his instruments. Below, the mining operations' drilling equipment began to malfunction, their electronic systems overloaded by energy patterns they weren't designed to process. Margaret Voss's voice came through the helicopter's loudspeaker, but now it carried desperation rather than authority. "Mr. Colton, you don't understand what you're unleashing. These energy patterns could destabilize technological infrastructure across the entire region." Jack stood beside the glowing tree, one hand resting on Duke's head, the other touching the warm bark that hummed with newly awakened life. "Maybe it's time our infrastructure learned to work with the earth instead of against it." The crystal seed, now fully integrated with the heart place, sent pulses of healing energy racing through underground channels. In the distance, Jack could see the mining operations' lights flickering and failing as their equipment encountered forces that couldn't be measured by conventional instruments. But more importantly, he could feel the land itself beginning to remember what it had been, what it could be again. The network of sacred sites was reactivating, connecting places of power that had been isolated and weakened by decades of industrial extraction. Duke looked up at him with eyes that held both dog and guardian, both faithful companion and ancient protector. The transformation was complete, but the relationship remained unchanged, built on loyalty, trust, and the deep understanding that some bonds transcend the boundaries between species, between worlds. As the first tendrils of new growth emerged from the earth around the planted seed, Jack Colton understood that his role as guardian had only just begun. 6 months later, Jack stood on his front porch with his morning coffee, watching Duke patrol the pastures with the unhurried confidence of a creature who had fulfilled his deepest purpose. The dog moved differently now, still the same faithful companion, but carrying himself with a dignity that spoke of ancient responsibilities, undertaken and honored. The ranch looked much the same as it always had, but Jack's eyes could now perceive layers of reality that had been invisible to him before. The network of energy that connected the heart place to sacred sites across the region was visible as subtle patterns of light that moved just beneath the surface of ordinary perception. The land hummed with a vitality that hadn't been present since his grandfather's time, maybe longer. Michael emerged from the house, adjusting his tie as he prepared for another day of legal meetings. His son had extended his stay far beyond the original emergency, drawn into the complex aftermath of what media outlets had dubbed the Montana phenomenon. "The EPA inspector will be here this afternoon," Michael reported, settling into the chair beside his father, along with representatives from the Geological Survey and something called the Institute for Consciousness Studies. Jack nodded, unsurprised. The planting of the crystal seed had triggered a cascade of changes that neither he nor Eleanor had fully anticipated. The mining equipment failures had been just the beginning. Across a 100-mile radius, electronic devices began exhibiting enhanced efficiency, almost as if they were drawing power from previously unknown sources. Solar panels and wind turbines in the region started producing energy outputs that exceeded their theoretical maximums. More remarkably, the network of underground energy channels had begun to affect the ecosystem itself. Plants grew faster and stronger. Soil that had been depleted by decades of industrial farming showed renewed fertility, and water sources that had been contaminated began to purify themselves through processes that conventional science couldn't explain. "Any word from Titan Earth Resources?" Jack asked. "Radio silence for the past month. My contacts in Denver say they've quietly withdrawn all their mineral claims in this area." Michael smiled with the satisfaction of a lawyer who had watched a powerful opponent retreat. Turns out, it's hard to maintain investor confidence when your extraction equipment can't function in the target region. Eleanor Crow-Feather appeared, around the corner of the house, moving with the patient pace of someone who had learned to work with time rather than against it. She'd taken to visiting the ranch weekly, monitoring the seed's development and teaching Jack to perceive the subtle signs of the land's spiritual health. "The tree has grown 3 feet since last month," she reported, settling into the third porch chair that had become her customary spot. "And the energy patterns are stabilizing. The network connections are becoming stronger and more permanent." Jack had seen the transformation himself. The ancient pine at the Hart Place now stood 40 feet taller than before, its branches reaching toward the sky with renewed vitality. Around its base, new growth emerged daily, not just ordinary plants, but formations that seemed to bridge the gap between organic and mineral. Living systems that grew like crystals but pulsed with biological rhythms. "Tom wants to bring a delegation from the tribal council next week," Eleanor continued. "They're discussing formal designation of this area as a protected sacred site." "What would that mean legally?" Michael asked, his professional instincts still engaged. Combined with the EPA's environmental protections and the Energy Research Zone designation, it would create multiple layers of legal protection against future mining attempts, Eleanor explained. "But more importantly, it would acknowledge what this place has always been, a heart place where the boundaries between worlds are thin." Duke trotted up to the porch, tail wagging as he greeted Eleanor with obvious affection. The dog had developed an unusual relationship with the elderly healer, as if recognizing a kindred spirit who understood the weight of guardianship. "How is he adjusting?" Eleanor asked, running her hands along Duke's sides where the crystal growth had once been. "Better than I expected," Jack admitted. "Sometimes I catch him staring at the northern hills like he's listening to voices I can't hear. But he's still Duke, still wants his morning walks, still steals food from my plate when he thinks I'm not looking." Eleanor laughed, a sound that seemed to harmonize with the subtle music that now emanated from the land itself. The ancient spirits don't change the heart, they only awaken what was always there. Duke was always a guardian, he just needed to remember. Over lunch, they discussed the steady stream of visitors the ranch had begun to attract. Scientists came to study the energy anomalies, environmentalists to document the ecological improvements, and spiritual seekers drawn by reports of healing phenomena. Jack had learned to be selective about whom he allowed onto the property, guided by Duke's instinctive ability to distinguish between those who came with respectful curiosity and those who sought to exploit or sensationalize. "Dr. Hansen called this morning," Jack mentioned. "He's bringing a team from the veterinary college next week. They want to study Duke's blood chemistry, see if they can understand how his system processed the crystal formation." "Will you allow it?" Eleanor asked. Jack considered the question, watching Duke chase a butterfly with the enthusiasm of a puppy. "If it helps them understand the relationship between living systems and mineral formations, maybe. But Duke's not going to any laboratory. Any research happens here on his terms." As the day wound toward evening, Michael prepared to return to Seattle, his extended leave finally at an end. Father and son stood together in the gathering dusk, their relationship somehow both unchanged and fundamentally transformed by the events they'd shared. "You could come with me," Michael offered quietly. "The ranch is stable now. The legal protections are in place. You could see your grandchildren more often, take a break from all this responsibility." Jack smiled, understanding his son's concern, but knowing his answer without needing to consider it. "This is where I belong, son, where our family has always belonged. The guardianship isn't a burden, it's a privilege." Duke appeared beside them, as if summoned by the conversation about belonging and purpose. The dog leaned against Jack's leg, warm and solid and reassuringly present. Besides, Jack added, scratching behind Duke's ears, I've got help with the job now. The land has ways of taking care of those who take care of it. As Michael's rental car disappeared down the drive, Jack and Duke walked out to check on the cattle. The evening light painted the hills in shades of gold and amber, just as it had for countless generations before human settlement and would for countless generations after. But now, Jack could see the light differently, could perceive the living network of energy that connected every blade of grass to the ancient pine at the heart place, every stream to the underground channels that pulsed with the earth's slow heartbeat. The crystal seed had grown into something magnificent, not just a tree, but a nexus of healing that would continue to strengthen and expand for decades to come. Sometimes the only family we have left walks on four legs, Jack reflected, watching Duke investigate the familiar sense of home ground. But sometimes that family carries within itself the seeds of renewal that can heal not just personal loss, but the deeper wounds between human ambition and the ancient wisdom of the land. The ranch was quiet now, settled into the rhythms that had sustained it for generations. But it was a different kind of quiet, not the silence of emptiness, but the peace of a place that had remembered its true purpose and found guardians worthy of that sacred trust.